a nurse stumbles upon the haunting cries of a patient locked away for decades in an abandoned asylum. But as he delves deeper into the chilling secrets of the past, he realizes that some screams are meant to remain unheard. Daniel stepped into the dimly lit corridor of the old asylum, the cold air immediately gripping his skin. His new job seemed easy enough, a night shift, alone, overseeing the building now used as an archive for forgotten medical records. The hallways stretched endlessly before him, their silence thick and unnerving. His footsteps echoed as he moved from one room to another, filing away old papers and checking the logs. But then, something stopped him in his tracks. A faint sound. At first he thought it was the wind, but as he paused, the noise grew clearer. It was a scream, faint, distant, almost like an echo. It seemed to come from below, perhaps the basement. Daniel shook his head, trying to dismiss it. Just the old building creaking, he muttered to himself. Yet the sound lingered in his mind. He checked the time. His shift had just begun, and he already felt a chill crawling up his spine. The asylum had been closed for decades, abandoned except for these medical files. But the scream, faint as it was, left him feeling like he wasn't quite as alone as he'd thought. The next night, Daniel arrived for his shift, but the unsettling memory of the scream stayed with him. As he walked through the dark corridors, the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves held secrets. Despite his efforts to shake it off, his thoughts kept drifting back to the basement. He hadn't imagined it. The sound had been too real. After an hour of work, Daniel found himself at the archive room, surrounded by dusty stacks of patient records. In a half-hearted attempt to distract himself, he began flipping through the old files. Some of the records dated back to the 1930s, detailing treatments, medications, and mental states of long-forgotten patients. One folder caught his eye, thicker than the others, marked only with a number. Patient 107. Curiosity got the better of him. As he opened the file, his eyes scanned the notes. Patient 107 had been kept in isolation for over 40 years. The records were sparse but disturbing. The patient, it seemed, had been violent, uncontrollable. What really unnerved Daniel was the last note, written in trembling handwriting over 50 years ago. Patient continues to scream. No known cause, still confined. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. The record had no discharge date, no mention of the patient's fate. But the last words were burned into his mind. Still confined. How could that be? He knew the asylum had been abandoned for decades. Who had written that note, and what had happened to patient 107? The sound of another faint scream echoed through the halls, as if on cue. His heart raced as the realization hit him. Something, or someone, was still down there. On the third night, Daniel couldn't focus. The records from patient 107 had taken over his thoughts. Each step he took echoed in the empty halls, his mind drifting back to the basement. The scream had returned the moment he stepped inside the building. This time it seemed louder, more urgent. He knew he had to investigate. With his flashlight in hand, Daniel made his way to the basement. The air grew colder as he descended the creaking stairs. The dim light from his flashlight flickered across the damp, cracked walls. His pulse quickened as he neared the far end of the basement, where the noise seemed to be coming from. There, half hidden in shadows, was a door. Old, rusted, and padlocked. The scream intensified, as if it were coming directly from behind the door. He took a step closer, the weight of his footsteps heavier now. He reached out to touch the padlock, feeling the chill of the cold metal under his fingers. There was something undeniably wrong about this place. How could there still be a locked door after all these years? Daniel backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that door wasn't just an old patient record. It was something far worse, He needed answers, but he also knew that breaking open that door could uncover something he wasn't ready for. The fourth night arrived, and Daniel was consumed by an overwhelming need to understand what was behind that door. The screams had haunted him since he first heard them, growing louder each time he entered the building. He couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? It was just him, the archive, and the screams. He had come prepared this time. In his bag was a crowbar. He hesitated for a moment, standing in front of the old rusted door, his breath shallow. The asylum's basement seemed darker tonight, the air thicker, almost suffocating. The scream pierced through the silence again, now unmistakable. Someone, or something, was in there. Daniel tightened his grip on the crowbar and wedged it under the padlock. The metal groaned as he forced it open, his heart racing faster with every movement. With one final pull, the lock snapped. The sound echoed in the basement, but the scream stopped. An eerie silence filled the space as Daniel pushed the door open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black room. The stench hit him immediately, a rotten, damp smell that made his stomach churn. His flashlight struggled to cut through the thick darkness. Inside the room, he found nothing but a single iron bed, its mattress torn and stained. Heavy chains hung from the bed frame, rusted and broken. But the most disturbing detail was the scratch marks on the walls, as if someone had clawed at them for years, desperately trying to escape. Suddenly, the air shifted. It felt as though something unseen was watching him, its presence heavy and suffocating. The scream returned, but this time, it didn't come from beyond the door. It was inside his head. Daniel staggered backward, the scream echoing louder and louder within his mind. He gripped his flashlight, its beam flickering nervously against the walls, casting twisted shadows that danced like specters in the dark. The oppressive air seemed to close in around him, and he fought against a rising wave of panic. He had opened a door to something far darker than he had anticipated. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to step back into the room. The chilling silence was suffocating, but he had to know what had happened here. As he examined the walls, he noticed more than just the scratches. There were words scrawled in desperation. They were fragmented thoughts, repeating phrases that sent shivers down his spine. "I can't breathe. Let me out." And the screams never stop. Each word felt like a plea, as if the tortured soul that had once occupied this space was reaching out to him from the depths of madness. The realization washed over him. This room had been a prison, not just for patient 107, but for anyone deemed too dangerous, too unstable. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and he felt a presence, cold and dark, wrapping around him. In that moment, the scream ceased, replaced by a haunting whisper, barely audible yet chilling. "Help me." It resonated deep within him, igniting a mix of fear and compassion. Daniel realized he couldn't leave this place without uncovering the truth. Determined, he searched the room for anything that might offer insight. In a corner, he found a frayed notebook, its pages yellowed with age. As he flipped it open, the words leapt out at him, and his heart sank. This was the journal of patient 107. In a world where the echoes of the past can haunt the living, Daniel's journey reminds us that some secrets are buried for a reason. The choices we make when faced with darkness define not only our fates, but also the fates of those trapped within it. Would you have the courage to confront the terrifying unknown, or would you walk away, leaving the past undisturbed? Click the video on your screen to continue this chilling journey and discover what happens next in Daniel's quest for truth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling stories that delve into the depths of fear and mystery. Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness often hides more than we can see. The staring room. A young man enters a psychiatric facility, convinced he's being watched by an unseen figure. But as his paranoia deepens, he discovers that this entity isn't just a figment of his imagination. It's a terrifying reflection of his darkest fears that could consume him entirely. James sat in the sterile room of the psychiatric facility, his heart racing as he glanced at the white walls closing in around him. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, a constant reminder that he was never truly alone. He had been admitted just days ago, yet the feeling of being watched had only intensified. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, always slipping away before he could focus on them. The medical staff treated his claims with skepticism, labeling him paranoid and delusional. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," a nurse said with a forced smile, but James could sense their unease. It wasn't just in his head. He could feel the presence lingering behind him, waiting. Every glance from the nurses felt like a scrutinizing gaze, and every rustle of the papers on the desk made him shiver. He tried to explain that it wasn't mere anxiety. This figure was real, a shadowy silhouette that followed him wherever he went. Each night, when darkness cloaked the facility, the sensation of being observed morphed into a suffocating dread. James knew he had to convince them before it was too late, before the figure made its presence known in a way he couldn't escape. The days dragged on in the psychiatric facility, and James's sense of isolation deepened. The walls that confined him felt like a prison, and each patient he encountered seemed to fade into the background noise of his fear. The nurses maintained their routines, but he noticed their furtive glances, their whispers huddled behind closed doors. Were they truly dismissing him as just another paranoid patient, or did they sense the darkness that lurked within? One night, as James lay on his narrow bed, he heard the unmistakable sound of breathing. It was soft, yet chilling, as though someone stood just beyond the threshold of his room. His heart raced as he sat up, the dim light casting elongated shadows across the walls. He could feel it again, that unseen figure, watching, waiting. The air turned heavy, and his skin prickled with dread. Compelled by an unrelenting urge, he crept to the door, peering into the dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that twisted and turned. For a moment, he thought he caught a glimpse of movement at the end of the corridor. A dark silhouette stood just beyond the reach of the light, still and silent. "Hello?" he called, his voice wavering. No response. Determined to uncover the truth, James ventured out of his room. Each step felt like an act of defiance against the lurking presence. He moved closer to the silhouette, his pulse pounding in his ears. As he approached, it vanished, leaving only an echo of his breath in the quiet hallway. The feeling of being watched intensified, an unshakable weight pressing down on him. What was this entity that followed him, and why was it drawn to him? The following morning, James's anxiety swirled like a storm inside him. He tried to shake off the haunting encounter, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. He sat at the cafeteria table, surrounded by other patients, yet he felt utterly alone. The conversations buzzed around him, but he barely registered the words. His mind was fixated on the shadowy figure that haunted him. Suddenly, a commotion broke his concentration. A fellow patient, Sarah, was shouting at the staff, her face twisted in fear. "It's in the walls! It's watching us!" Her eyes darted around the room, wild and frantic, causing whispers to ripple through the other patients. James's heart raced. She sounded as if she had seen the same entity. The nurses rushed to calm her, but their attempts were met with resistance. "You don't understand. It's always there," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. The sight of her unraveling sent a chill down James's spine. He could see the fear etched in her features, a mirror to his own turmoil. As the nurses finally subdued her, James caught the eye of one of the staff members, Nurse Lisa. Her expression held a mix of concern and disbelief. It struck him then. Perhaps Sarah's fears were real. Perhaps they were all being watched, not just by the staff, but by something much darker. The thought sent a shiver down his spine as he contemplated the implications of this shared torment. Days turned into nights, and James felt himself slipping further into the abyss of paranoia. The incidents of strange occurrences multiplied, the flickering lights, the hushed whispers he could never quite catch, and the ever-present feeling of eyes boring into him. Each day brought new rumors about Sarah's outburst, whispers of her disturbing behavior spreading among the staff and patients alike. They seemed to view her as a warning rather than a victim of the same unseen terror that gripped him. As the weeks dragged on, James's resolve began to crumble. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and the stress of his surroundings became unbearable. One night, after yet another fruitless search for the shadow, he found himself wandering the facility's darkened halls, desperation driving him forward. Each creak of the floorboards felt like the echo of a warning bell, but he pushed on, determined to confront the entity that had tormented him. In the common room, he stumbled upon a group of patients gathered around a television, their faces illuminated by the flickering screen. Their laughter felt jarring, out of place in the eerie silence that hung over the facility. But then he saw it, a figure standing just beyond the window, shrouded in darkness. It was tall, indistinct, its eyes glinting like stars in the night sky. James's breath hitched. "Can't you see it?" he shouted, but the others merely chuckled, dismissing him as yet another disturbed mind. The laughter faded, replaced by a suffocating silence as the figure seemed to step closer. Panic surged within him. He was losing control, trapped in a nightmare where no one believed him. His mind raced. What would happen if he couldn't escape this prison of fear? James's heart pounded in his chest as the figure outside the window loomed larger, the dark shape blending into the shadows of the night. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him, as if he were standing on the precipice of a dark revelation. "It's real! It's out there!" he shouted, but his voice echoed in the room, met only with uneasy glances from the other patients. Desperation clawed at him, and he turned away from the window, determined to confront the terror that had consumed him for so long. He rushed down the hallway to the basement, the place he had avoided since his admission. In the dimly lit corridor, the air grew colder, the oppressive silence amplifying every sound. His footsteps echoed like a warning. As he descended the stairs, the walls seemed to close in around him. The flickering light overhead buzzed ominously, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly. James felt a strange pull towards a locked door at the end of the hallway, the chill radiating from it almost magnetic. With a shaky breath, he pushed against it, the door creaking open as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the room was small and suffocating. Papers were strewn across the floor, filled with frantic scrawls and cryptic notes about patients who had vanished without a trace. At the center lay a dusty mirror, its surface covered in grime. As he approached, the reflection shimmered, and suddenly, he saw not just his own terrified face, but the figure that had haunted him, a twisted, pale visage that mimicked his every movement. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave. It wasn't just an observer. It was a part of him, a dark fragment of his psyche manifested into a living nightmare. In the end, James's journey teaches us a haunting truth. Sometimes our greatest fears are not external forces lurking in the shadows, but the darker parts of ourselves that we try to ignore. Facing these inner demons can be terrifying, but it's a necessary step toward understanding who we truly are. How would you have reacted if you found yourself in James's shoes, battling the unseen terror of your own mind? If you're intrigued by this chilling tale, click the video on your screen to continue this haunting journey into the unknown. Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness might be closer than you think.